A mountain man bought a cheap cabin for $10 and found a dying horse trapped inside. Alone in the wilderness, he thought it was just a place to sleep through the winter. But when he broke open the rotting boards, he uncovered more than a starving animal. He uncovered a secret that could set the whole frontier on fire. Every hoofbeat of that horse carried a story of betrayal, stolen land, and a family's honor. And just when he thought saving the horse might save his soul, a fierce young woman rode in from the reservation, claiming the animal was hers and warning that enemies were closing in. Now the mountain man stands between two worlds: justice and greed, survival and faith. The cabin he bought for $10 may cost him everything. Will he find redemption in saving a life, or lose his own when the outlaws come to take it back? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Through the broken slats of the lean-to, Boone's lantern light revealed the horse's trembling form. Its ribs stood out like barrel staves under a hide dulled by dust and neglect. The animal's eyes rolled white with terror, nostrils flaring as it fought against the tangle of boards that trapped its back legs. "Easy now," Boone murmured, setting the lantern on a crossbeam. The flame's glow caught cobwebs thick as yarn in the corners. He moved slow, keeping his voice steady like he would with a spooked Mustang. "Ain't gonna hurt you none." The horse's struggles weakened, whether from exhaustion or a hint of trust in the gentle words. Boone could see it was a Mari, though her breeding was hard to guess under the layers of dirt and damage. Her hooves had grown long and split, telling a story of months without care. His jaw tightened as he studied the crude prison around her. Broken boards and rusty nails had torn her legs in several places. The wounds weren't fresh. Someone had left her here to die, trapped in her own waste and darkness. What kind of man does such a thing? He muttered, though he reckoned he knew the answer. The same sort who'd sell a cabin without mentioning the suffering creature locked inside it. The Mari's head dropped, her strength fading. Boone knew he had to work fast. He pulled his hunting knife from his belt, the blade catching the lantern light. The horse flinched at the shine of steel. "Steady, girl," he soothed, reaching out with his free hand. His calloused fingers found a spot behind her ear that wasn't rubbed raw. Her skin twitched at his touch, but she didn't pull away. "That's right. Let's get you out of this mess." Working by the dim light, Boone began cutting through the ropes of spider silk and sawing at the boards that held the Mari captive. The wood was soft with rot, giving way easier than he'd expected. Each splinter that fell free seemed to ease something in the horse's posture. Sweat dampened his shirt, despite the evening chill. The labor was hard, but it was honest work, the kind that could begin to wash away the sour taste of being swindled. $10 wasn't much, but a man's word should mean something, even in a place like Grey Rock. When the last board fell away, the Mari didn't bolt like he'd half expected. She stood trembling, head low, as if unsure what to do with freedom after so long without it. Boone ran his hands down her legs, grateful to find no breaks hiding beneath the cuts and bruises. "You're gonna need some tending," he told her, straightening, with a grunt as his own tired muscles protested. "But first, water." He retrieved his canteen from inside the cabin. The Mari's ears pricked forward at the sound of sloshing water. She drank in careful sips from his cupped hand, good sense winning over desperation. Smart horse, Boone thought, to still have such restraint after everything. The rest of his evening meal, the cold beans he'd planned to eat, went to the Mari. She lit them carefully from his palm while he studied her by lantern light. Under the grime, her coat might have been bay, though it was hard to tell for certain. She had good lines about her, despite her current state. Someone had bred her for quality before whatever twist of fate had landed her in this sorry place. "Reckon we both bought more than we bargained for tonight," Boone said softly, rubbing her bony shoulder. The Mare leaned into his touch, nearly throwing him off balance. Touch-starved, he realized, like any creature left too long alone. He'd meant to spend the night in the cabin, but the moldy air inside couldn't compare to the clean pine smell of the lean-to, now that the worst of the filth was cleared away. Boone spread his bedroll in the corner, close enough to reach the Mare if she needed him. The horse watched him with dark eyes that held more trust than he deserved, given how short their acquaintance was. "Sleep while you can," he told her, settling onto his blankets. "Tomorrow's soon enough to figure what's next." The lantern burned low as Boone drifted toward sleep, lulled by the steady sound of the Mare's breathing and the soft shifting of her hooves on the dirt floor. His last thought before dreams took him was that maybe he hadn't been swindled after all. $10 seemed fair enough price for a chance to do right by a creature in need. In the darkness, the Mare stood guard over her unlikely savior, her presence keeping watch against the loneliness that had haunted them both. The night deepened, bringing bitter cold that crept through the lean-to's broken walls. Boone gathered snow in his tin cup, holding it over the small fire he'd built in a cleared corner. The Mare's breathing came shallow and quick, her sides heaving with each labored breath. She hadn't moved from where she'd collapsed after drinking earlier. "Just a little more," Boone murmured, waiting for the snow to melt. Steam rose from the cup, carrying the metallic scent of hot tin. When the water cooled enough, he cupped his rough hands and offered it to the Mare. She lifted her head, weakly, lips trembling as she sipped from his palms. The process was slow melt, cool, offer. Melt, cool, offer. His knees ached from kneeling beside her, but he didn't stop. The Mare needed water to fight off the weakness that gripped her, and Boone had nothing else to give except time and patience. At the bottom of his pack, he found the last of his traveling oats. The grains rattled in the near-empty sack as he poured them into a rusted bucket he'd found in the cabin's corner. The Mare's ears twitched at the sound, but she made no move toward the food. "Come on, girl," he coaxed, holding the bucket near her nose. "Need to get some strength back in you." The horse's collapse had been gradual, first her legs trembling, then her knees buckling until she lay on her side in the dirt. Now she barely moved, except for the rise and fall of her ribs. Boone's chest tightened with worry. He'd seen horses give up before, seen that light fade from their eyes when the fight left them. Working by firelight, he began the delicate task of removing the rotted harness that still clung to her hide. The leather had grown into her flesh in places, leaving raw sores that made his jaw clench with anger. Who would leave tack on a horse to torture it like this? The Mare flinched as he worked the straps free, but made no sound of protest. "Sorry, girl," he whispered, his fingers gentle around the worst spots. "Gotta get this off you." When the last of the harness fell away, Boone spread his blankets over the Mare's trembling frame. The wool was warm from sitting near the fire, and some of the tension eased from her muscles as the heat seeped in. He kept one hand on her neck, feeling her pulse flutter beneath his fingers. Without meaning to, words of prayer slipped from his lips, rusty with disuse but remembered all the same. "Lord, if you're listening, this creature could use your help." The familiar phrases brought back memories of his youth, of his father teaching him to care for their farm horses. Each animal had been precious then, a gift to be treasured. Through the long hours, Boone tended the fire and spoke softly to the Mare about those memories. He told her about old Dan, the plow horse who taught him patience, and Lightning, the sprightly Mare who'd carried him on his first solo ride. Stories he hadn't thought about in years flowed freely in the darkness, as if the Mare's quiet presence drew them out of him. Dawn came slow, seeping through the gaps in the walls like watered milk. The Mare lifted her head as the first pale sunlight touched her face. Boone held his breath, watching as she gathered her strength. "That's it," he encouraged as she rocked forward, testing her legs. Nice and easy now. It took 3 attempts before she managed to stand, swaying dangerously on legs stiff from cold and weakness. Boone steadied her with his shoulder, guiding her slow steps toward the lean-to's entrance. Outside, winter sun cast long shadows across the snow-dusted ground. The Mare's steps were uncertain, but she followed his lead into the pale morning light. Steam rose from her back as the sun warmed her blankets. Though she trembled with the effort of standing, her eyes seemed clearer, more present than they'd been the night before. Standing there in the crisp morning air, Boone felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just about saving a horse anymore. It was as if God had placed this creature in his path for a reason, a chance to remember what it meant to care for something beyond himself. He studied the cabin's sagging roof, noting the spots where snow had worked its way through the shingles. The place needed work, but it could be made sound again with effort. Like the Mare, it just needed someone willing to try. "Reckon we'll start with that roof," he told the horse, who leaned against him trustingly. "Get us both proper shelter before the next storm hits." The tools in his pack weren't meant for carpentry, but they'd serve well enough to patch the worst spots. As he gathered what he'd need, Boone felt the unfamiliar weight of responsibility settling over him. He'd been drifting so long, he'd almost forgotten what it was like to have purpose, to be needed. The Mare nickered softly as he moved about, her eyes following his every motion. There was trust in that gaze, trust he hadn't earned yet, but meant to deserve. For the first time in years, Boone felt less like a man running from his past and more like someone with a future worth building. 3 days passed like water flowing over stones, each sunrise bringing new strength to the gray Mare Boone had taken to calling Ash. The name had come to him naturally, watching her coat gleam silver in the weak winter light. Though still weak, her eyes held more life with each passing hour. Boone settled into a rhythm of care. Before dawn, he would trek down to the frozen creek, breaking through ice with his axe to fill 2 wooden buckets. The walk back was harder, water sloshing against his legs, but he made the trip 4 times each day. Ash needed clean water to heal Dot in the lean-to. He mixed thin mash from cornmeal and the last of his dried apples. The sweet smell drew Ash's interest, and she would lip eagerly at the wooden bowl while Boone steadied her. Each small meal seemed to put more flesh on her prominent ribs. "There you go, girl," he would murmur, watching her eat, nice and slow. The woodpile grew as Boone worked, swinging his axe through the cold hours. Dead pine and scrub oak fell under his blade, then got split into manageable pieces. His shoulders ached, unused to such constant labor after years of drifting, but the pain felt honest, purposeful. Each morning, he helped Ash take a few stumbling steps in the packed snow outside the lean-to. Her legs trembled with the effort, but she tried, leaning into his shoulder for support. On the 3rd day, she managed to walk the length of the cabin before her strength gave out. "You're getting there," Boone told her, guiding her back to the shelter. "Just need time." The lean-to itself needed work. Wind whistled through gaps in the planking, and the roof leaked in 3 places. Boone gathered fallen boards from around the property, testing each for soundness. Those that passed his inspection got hammered into place with nails he had carefully pulled from other parts of the dilapidated cabin. It wasn't pretty work, but it would keep out the worst of the weather. On the 4th morning, Boone stepped out of the cabin into bitter frost. Something made him pause, his breath clouding in the early light. Boot prints marked the fresh snow near his door, prints he hadn't made. They circled the cabin, leading to the lean-to and back. The hair on his neck rose. His old Sharps rifle hung just inside the door, and he retrieved it with practiced quiet. Out here, unexpected visitors rarely brought good news. The sound of hoofbeats drew his attention. A rider approached through the pines, wrapped in a striped blanket against the cold. As they drew closer, Boone made out a young woman, her black hair in 2 long braids. She sat her pony with the easy grace of someone born to the saddle. She was Ute, he realized, noting the beadwork on her clothing and the distinctive weave of her blanket. Her expression was proud, but her eyes held anger as she reined her mount to a stop. "That horse is stolen," she said, without greeting, her English clear despite its careful pronunciation. She pointed to the lean-to where Ash stood. "From my family's herd." Boone kept his rifle lowered but ready. "Name's Boone McAllister," he said evenly. "Found her trapped in there, half dead from neglect." The woman dismounted in a fluid motion. "I am Maya." She strode toward the lean-to, her movements sharp with purpose. "The brand will show the truth." Boone followed as she approached Ash. The Mare's ears pricked forward with interest, and she allowed Maya to run gentle hands over her neck. When Maya reached the horse's flank, she brushed aside the winter coat to reveal a scarred brand. "This mark belongs to my family," Maya declared, turning to face Boone. Her dark eyes flashed. "You have no right to keep what was stolen." "Now hold on," Boone protested, setting his rifle against the wall. "I bought this cabin fair and square. $10 to a fellow down in Grey Rock. Found the horse trapped inside, dying from hunger and thirst. A thief's sale does not make right ownership." Maya's voice held steel. "This horse belonged to my brother before his death. She was taken in a raid, along with others." Her hand rested protectively on Ash's neck. "If you do not return her, my people will seek justice through the Indian agent." Boone saw the truth in her eyes, the pain of loss beneath her fierce exterior. But he also saw something else, the same determination to save this horse that had driven him these past days. "I ain't no thief," he said quietly. "Just a man trying to keep this creature alive." "Maybe we can," but Maya cut him off with a sharp gesture. 3 days, she said. "Then we come for what is ours." She mounted her pony in one smooth motion, gathering the reins. "Choose wisely, Boone McAllister." She wheeled her horse and rode away, leaving Boone standing in the snow beside the lean-to. Ash nickered softly, watching the rider disappear among the trees. The winter wind whistled through the pines as Boone and Maya faced each other across the trampled snow. Her words hung in the frozen air between them, heavy with the weight of accusation and loss. Boone glanced at his rifle leaning against the cabin wall, then deliberately turned away from it. "Sun's getting high," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "I've got beans warming on the fire. Might do us both good to talk this through proper-like, with food in our bellies." Maya's expression remained guarded, her hand resting on her pony's neck. "I did not come here to share a meal with a horse thief." "No, ma'am, reckon you didn't." Boone moved slowly toward the cabin door. "But I ain't no thief, and that's God's honest truth. Let me prove it to you over a hot meal." He disappeared inside, leaving the door open. The smell of warming beans drifted out on the cold air. After a long moment, Maya tied her pony to a low branch and followed, her steps cautious as a deer approaching. Water dot inside, Boone ladled beans into 2 tin cups, steam rising in the dim light. He offered one to Maya, who hesitated before accepting it. She remained standing near the door while he settled onto his wooden stool. "Dot salt if you want it," he said, indicating a small pouch on the rough-hewn table. Maya shook her head, but hunger won out over suspicion. She sat cross-legged near the hearth, keeping the door in sight as she ate. "I paid $10 for this cabin," Boone said after a while, his spoon scraping the bottom of his cup. Fellow down in Grey Rock was eager to sell. Never mentioned no horse in the deal. Found her that first night, trapped in the lean-to, half dead from hunger and cold. Maya's cup paused halfway to her mouth. $10 for a stolen horse and cabin. "Didn't know she was stolen," Boone set his empty cup aside. "Just knew she needed help, same as any of God's creatures would." Been nursing her back these past days, getting her to eat and drink again. She was my brother's pride, Maya said softly, her voice catching. Though she tried to hide it, Boone could hear tears beneath her words. The finest mare in our herd. When the raiders came at night, they took her and others. My brother, she, fell silent, staring into the fire. Boone waited, watching the shadows dance across her face. Finally, he spoke. I'm powerful sorry about your brother, Miss Maya. Truly I am. But that horse out there still needs care. She can barely walk the length of the cabin without trembling. Maya set her empty cup down with careful precision. I have seen how she struggles. The raiders nearly killed her with neglect. Then let me make you an offer, Boone said, leaning forward. Let her stay here until she's strong again. I've got feed and shelter, and I know something about bringing horses back from the edge. Once she's healthy, you decide what happens to her. Maya's dark eyes studied him, measuring his words against some inner standard. Why should I trust you? Because I gave my word, Boone replied simply. And because every morning and evening you can ride up here and see for yourself how she's doing. I won't stop you. The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Outside, Ash nickered softly from her shelter, as if adding her voice to the discussion. Until she is strong, Maya said finally, each word deliberate. I will come each day to watch. If you harm her, you have my permission to take both horse and cabin if I do her wrong, Boone assured her. Though I reckon neither would be much use to you if I did. A ghost of a smile touched Maya's lips, there and gone like winter. Sunshine. She rose gracefully, setting her cup on the table. Tomorrow, I return. Have her ready for me to examine. Boone nodded, following her to the door. They watched as she mounted her pony, adjusting her blanket against the cold. With a final look at the lean-to where Ash stood, she turned her horse toward the trees and vanished into the gathering dusk. That night, Boone knelt beside his small fire, hands clasped in prayer. It had been years since he'd done more than mutter grace over his meals, but tonight the words came easier. Lord, he whispered, help me prove worthy of this trust. Help me bridge this gap between us. Show her that not all men mean harm. And, if it be your will, help that horse heal strong and true. The fire burned low as he prepared for sleep, laying out his bedroll near the hearth. Outside, coyotes called to each other across the dark hills, their voices rising and falling like questions. Boone lay awake, listening to their song mix with the soft sounds of Ash shifting in her sheltered trust. He thought was like a wild creature, easily startled, hard to capture, but worth the patient work of winning. Tomorrow would bring Maya back, suspicious and proud, to watch his every move. Somehow, he would have to prove himself worthy of the faith she'd reluctantly given. Dawn painted the mountain sky in streaks of pink and gold as Maya's pony picked its way up the snowy trail to Boone's cabin. She carried a deerskin bundle across her lap, the morning frost glinting on her dark hair. Boone watched from the doorway, a tin cup of coffee warming his weathered hands. Ash whinnied softly from the lean-to at Maya's approach. The horse looked better today. His coat had begun to shine, and his eyes were brighter than they'd been since Boone found him. Morning, Boone called as Maya dismounted. She nodded in response, untying her bundle. I brought medicine, she said, spreading the contents on a flat rock near the cabin. Cornmeal to build strength, and sage herbs from our healing woman. Her fingers sorted through dried plants with careful precision. Boone set his coffee aside and knelt to examine the offerings. Mighty kind of you. How do we use them? The sage must steep in hot water, like tea. Maya demonstrated, measuring portions with practiced hands. Our people have used these plants since the time of our grandfathers' grandfathers. The horse will drink it with the cornmeal mash. While Maya prepared the medicine, Boone noticed a broken strap on her saddle. "Got some leatherworking tools inside," he offered. "Could show you how to mend that bridle, if you've a mind to learn." Maya considered this, then nodded. They spent the morning working side by side at Boone's rough table. His calloused hands guided hers through the process of punching holes and stitching leather. Though they spoke little, the silence felt comfortable, like a warm blanket against the winter chill. Days passed in similar fashion. Maya would arrive with the sun, bringing herbs and quiet determination. Together they tended Ash, whose strength grew steadily. The horse could now walk the length of the cabin yard without trembling, his head held higher with each passing day. Boone found himself watching for Maya's arrival each morning, enjoying her measured movements and the gentle way she spoke to Ash. She reminded him of mountain streams, quiet on the surface, but running deep and strong underneath. One evening, as the sun sank behind the pines, they sat by Boone's fire sharing coffee and journey bread. Maya stared into the flames, her expression distant. "My people's spring lies near this ridge," she said suddenly, breaking their comfortable silence. "The water has flowed there since before my grandmother's time. But lately, strange men watch it. They tell us we have no right to be there." Boone's hand tightened on his cup. He remembered the locked chest he'd discovered in the cabin's loft, pushed to the back corner as if hiding something. "There's something you should see," he said, rising. "Found it when I was patching the roof, but never got around to opening it." Maya followed him up the narrow ladder to the loft. Moonlight streamed through gaps in the wooden walls as Boone dragged the chest into view. Its lock was rusted, but still held firm. "With your permission," Boone said, reaching for his tool bag. Maya nodded, and he set to work with a prybar. The lock gave way with a sharp crack. Inside, beneath a layer of dust and mouse droppings, lay a stack of papers. Boone lifted them carefully, moving closer to the moonlight. Maya leaned in, her shoulder brushing his as they studied the documents. "Together, these are land deeds," Boone said slowly, anger building in his chest. "And maps marking your people's spring. Look at these signatures to Jed Tolan and his gang. Saw them drinking in Grey Rock just last week, bragging about some big plans. The men who watch our spring," Maya whispered, her fingers tracing the crude markings. "They carry papers like these, claiming the water belongs to them now." "Forgeries," Boone growled. "I'd stake my life on it. These men, they're claim jumpers, move into dying towns, forge documents, then drive honest folks off their land. Been hearing about their kind all across the territory." Maya's face hardened in the dim light. "They think because we have no papers, we have no rights. But our people's blood and bones are in this land. The spring has been ours through all the seasons of my father's life, and his father's before him." Boone gathered the papers carefully. "These could prove their claims are false. But it'll take more than documents to stop men like Tolan. They live by the gun, not the law." Maya straightened, her voice steady and strong. "Then we will face them. Together, your truth and my people's truth combined." They climbed down from the loft, the damning papers tucked safely in Boone's jacket. Outside, an owl called across the darkening valley. Ash stomped in his shelter, as if sensing the tension in the air. Morning frost crackled under their boots as beastness. Boone and Maya spread the papers across a fallen log outside the cabin. The weak winter sun did little to warm them, but neither noticed. The cold as they studied the forged documents, Maya's fingers traced the crude map of her people's spring. "This water has fed our garden since the time of my great-grandfather," she said, her voice tight with emotion. "Without it, our corn will wither. The children and elders cannot survive a dry season." Boone nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. He'd seen what happened to communities when water rights were stolen had witnessed too many ghost towns born from such theft. "These papers ain't worth the ink they're written with," he said, tapping the clumsy signatures. "But we need someone with authority to help prove it." He paused, scratching his graying beard. "There's a preacher down in Grey Rock, Reverend Alcott. Good man. Speaks up for native families at the agency when there's trouble." Maya considered this, her dark eyes thoughtful. "I know of him. Our elders say he has a straight tongue, speaks truth, even when others turn away." "Reckon we should pay him a visit," Boone suggested. "Show him what we found." They prepared for the journey into town. Maya mounted her sturdy pony while Boone carefully led Ash, who was still weak but determined. The trail wound downhill through stands of pine, patches of ice glinting treacherously between the rocks. They moved slowly, mindful of Ash's uncertain footing. The morning air bit sharp and clean in their lungs. Boone kept one hand on Ash's lead rope, the other ready to steady the horse if he stumbled. Maya rode slightly ahead, her woven blanket bright against the winter landscape dot by midday, the weathered spire of Grey Rock's church came into view. The building listed slightly to one side, its paint peeling in the harsh mountain weather. They tied their horses in the lean-to beside the church, Boone taking extra care to make Ash comfortable with fresh hay. Inside, the church smelled of pine wood and lamp oil. Reverend Alcott looked up from his Bible, his lean face creasing into a welcome smile. The preacher's clothes were warm but clean, his eyes kind beneath gray brows. "Boone McAllister," he said, rising from his desk. "And Miss Maya Nez, I remember you from the summer gathering." He gestured to the rough wooden chairs. "Please, sit. What brings you both on such a cold day?" They settled into the chairs as Boone carefully withdrew the documents from his coat. The preacher listened intently as they explained their discovery, his expression growing grave as he examined the papers. "These are forgeries, without doubt," Alcott confirmed, holding one deed up to the light. "See here, the paper's too new, and this seal is poorly copied." He set the documents down with careful precision. "Jed Tolan and his men have been causing trouble up and down the territory. They prey on vulnerable towns, anywhere the laws spread thin." Maya leaned forward. "Will you help us bring these to the Indian agent? Show him how they steal what is not theirs to take." Alcott nodded slowly. "I'll speak for you, but I must warn you both these are dangerous men. They have friends in town, people who profit from their schemes." He looked directly at Boone. "They won't take kindly to being exposed." Boone felt something stir in his chest, a familiar weight of responsibility he hadn't carried in years. He glanced at Maya, saw the hope kindling in her eyes, and knew he couldn't walk away. "Much obliged, Reverend," Boone said, carefully wrapping the papers. "When can you ride to the agency?" "Give me 2 days to arrange things here," Alcott replied. "Come back then, and we'll make the journey together." Outside, snow had begun to fall in lazy spirals. Maya and Boone prepared their horses for the return trip, their breath clouding in the cold air. The documents were secured safely in Boone's saddlebag, wrapped in oilcloth against the weather. "Thank you," Maya said quietly as they started up the trail, "for standing with my people in this." Boone adjusted Ash's lead rope, considering his words carefully. "Ain't right what they're doing. Sometimes a man's got to choose where he stands." They rode in companionable silence as the snow fell thicker around them, each lost in thoughts of the justice they hoped would come. Ash moved more surely now, his steps growing stronger with each passing day, much like the bond forming between his unlikely caretakers. The days passed like water flowing over stones, steady and peaceful. Each morning, Maya arrived at the cabin as the sun touched the mountain peaks. Together, she and Boone tended to Ash, whose strength returned like spring after a hard winter. One evening, as they sat by the crackling fire, Maya's gaze turned distant. My brother Thomas taught me to ride before I could walk, she said, running her fingers over the leather bridle in her lap. He said I was born knowing the language of horses. A soft smile touched her lips. He would have liked seeing Ash grow strong again. Boone nodded, stirring the cooking beans. The firelight cast dancing shadows on the cabin walls. Lost someone. Myself, long time ago, he said quietly. My Sarah. Fever took her our second winter together. He hadn't spoken of Sarah in years, but something about Maya's presence made the words come easier. She loved horses too. Used to name every wild Mustang we'd see from the cabin window. Maya's eyes met his across the flames, understanding flowing between them like a silent stream. The ones we lose live on in our memories, she said, like stars that guide us home. As the week drew to a close, Ash stood taller, his coat beginning to shine. He could carry light loads now, though Boone was careful not to push him too hard. They planned to ride to the agency the next morning, where Reverend Alcott would present their evidence against the Tolan gang. That evening, they brought the documents to the preacher's barn for safekeeping. Alcott stored them carefully in the Philly in the loft, wrapped in oilskin. We'll leave at first light, he said, securing the barn door. The agent needs to see these papers before more harm is done. Walking back to the cabin under a star-filled sky, Boone felt hope rising in his chest. Maybe this place could become more than just shelter. Maybe it could become home. Maya rode beside him, humming a soft melody that seemed to match his thoughts. The piece shattered like glass in the deepest part of night. Shouts and an orange glow jolted Boone from sleep. He grabbed his coat and rifle, bursting through the cabin door. The sky to the south blazed bright as day. The preacher's barn was engulfed in flames. Maya, he called. She was already mounting her pony, her face set with determination. They rode hard down the trail, the heat of the fire growing stronger with each stride. Ash followed behind, stronger now, but still not ready for riding Dot as they approached the burning barn. Dark figures emerged from the shadows. Moonlight glinted off drawn revolvers. Jed Tolan stepped forward, his broad jaw set in a cruel smile. 4 more men flanked him, weapons trained on Boone and Maya. Evening, folks, Tolan drawled, the fire casting demonic shadows across his face. Shame about the Reverend's barn. Accidents happen when people stick their noses where they don't belong. Boone's hand tightened on his rifle, but he kept it lowered. 5 guns against 1 made poor odds. Those papers proved you stole that spring, he said, voice hard as iron. The agent would have seen the truth. Truth? Tolan spat. Truth is whatever a man with enough friends says it is. He gestured toward the inferno. Those papers are ash. Now, just like everything else that crosses us will be. Maya sat straight on her pony, showing no fear. Our people will not surrender the spring, she declared. We have lived here since before your grandfather's time. Your people won't have much choice, girl, Tolan sneered. Water's worth more than gold out here, and gold buys plenty of friends in high places. The barn's roof collapsed with a thunderous crash, sending sparks spiraling into the night sky. In the distance, shouts and running feet announced the town was waking. Reverend Alcott appeared from behind his house, face ashen in the firelight. You're making a mistake, Tolan, Boone warned, though his heart sank watching their evidence burn. Decent folks won't stand for this. Decent folks? Tolan laughed, ugly and sharp. They'll believe what we tell them to believe. And tomorrow, they'll hear how a crazy old mountain man and his Indian friend burned down the preacher's barn. He raised his gun higher. Now ride out of here before we decide to make an example of you both. Maya's pony stamped nervously, sensing her rider's tension. The fire roared behind them, consuming their hopes for justice along with the barn. Boone measured the distance to the nearest cover, knowing they had no choice but to retreat for. Now, "This isn't finished," Maya said, her voice carrying clearly over the crackling flames. The firelight reflected in her eyes like a warrior's spirit awakened. "No," Boone agreed quietly. "It surely ain't." They backed their horses away slowly, keeping their eyes on the armed men until shadow swallowed them. Behind them, the barn burned like a funeral pyre for their dreams of easy justice, lighting up the night sky with angry flames and bitter promises. "Looks like the old man's gone soft," one of Talon's men sneered, tobacco juice staining his beard. "Siding with savages now, are you?" Boone stood his ground, though his heart hammered against his ribs. The barn fire painted everything in hellish orange light, throwing long shadows across the trampled snow. Maya remained astride her pony, one hand reaching toward Ash to keep him calm. "Only savages I see here are the ones burning down a preacher's." "Barn," Boone said, his voice steady despite his fear. Talon's face twisted with rage. He nodded to his men, and two of them lunged forward. Rough hands grabbed Boone's shoulders, shoving him hard against the ground. The impact drove the air from his lungs. Sharp rocks bit into his back as boots surrounded him. "You're a traitor to your own kind," Talon spat, landing a kick to Boone's side that made him gasp. "Should have stayed out of our business." Through blurred vision, Boone saw Maya trying to guide Ash away from the violence. But one of Toland's men uncoiled a long whip, its crack splitting the night air like thunder. The leather tip caught Maya's arm, drawing a thin line of blood. "Get out of town, girl," the man growled, raising the whip again. "Unless you want worse." Down the hill, townsfolk gathered in clumps, their faces pale in the firelight. Women clutched shawls around their shoulders, men shifted uneasily, but no one stepped forward. Their silence spoke volumes about the grip of fear Tolan held over Grey Rock. Boone pushed himself to his knees, tasting copper in his mouth. Blood dripped from his split lip onto the snow. His ribs screamed in protest as he tried to stand. Reverend Alcott's voice rang out suddenly, clear and strong. He strode forward, his warm Bible clutched in one hand. "Woe to those who make unjust laws," he quoted, pointing an accusing finger at Tolan, "who deprive the poor of their rights and withhold justice from the oppressed." Tolan's men exchanged uncertain glances, but their leader just laughed. "Save your preaching for Sunday, Reverend. God ain't watching tonight." As if in answer, the barn's remaining structure gave way with an almighty crash. Sparks exploded skyward like a swarm of angry fireflies. Ash reared at the sound, but instead of bolting, planted himself firmly between the outlaws and Boone's crumpled form. The horse's loyalty, even in fear, struck deep into Boone's heart. "Mount up, boys," Tolan ordered, swinging onto his horse. "Our work here's done." He leaned down toward Boone, voice dripping with menace. "Next time won't be just a warning." The gang rode off into the darkness, their laughter floating back like coyotes' calls. Maya dismounted quickly and hurried to Boone's side. Her gentle hands helped him stand, though every movement sent daggers of pain through his chest. "Lean on me," she said softly. "We must get you inside." The walk back to the cabin seemed endless. Each step jarred Boone's injured ribs, and his breath came in short gasps. Behind them, Ash and Maya's pony followed like faithful shadows. The smell of smoke clung to their clothes, a bitter reminder of their defeat. Inside the cabin, Maya worked by lamplight. She tore strips from an old shirt, binding Boone's ribs with careful movements. Her own injured arm she had barely acknowledged, though the whip mark stood angry against her skin. "I'm sorry," Boone whispered as she worked. "Should have protected you better." Maya's hands paused in their task. "You stood against them," she said firmly. "That is more than most would do." Still, shame burned in Boone's chest, worse than his physical pain. He lay on his bedroll later, unable to find sleep despite exhaustion. Through the cabin's single window, he could see the orange glow where the barn still smoldered. The sight of Maya being struck, of the townspeople's fearful silence, of their precious evidence turning to ash, it all played over and over in his mind. Outside, an owl called into the darkness. The sound reminded Boone of an old saying his father once shared: "Night seems darkest just before dawn." But as he listened to Maya's quiet breathing from her place near the fire, he wondered if dawn would bring any light to their situation at all. The charred remains of the barn stood as a stark warning to anyone who might challenge Toland's power. Yet somehow, watching Maya tend to ash with unwavering gentleness, Boone felt a spark of something beneath his pain. Not quite hope, not yet, but perhaps its stubborn seed. Snow fell in thick, silent curtains, transforming the harsh landscape into something softer. Inside the cabin, Boone lay on his bedroll, each breath a careful negotiation with his injured ribs. The bruises had deepened to purple-black across his side, a painful reminder of Toland's cruelty. Maya moved quietly around the small space, her own injured arm now wrapped in clean cloth. She kept the fire steady, brewing pine needle tea and changing the poultice on Boone's worst bruises. The bitter herbs she used made his nose twitch, but he couldn't deny their soothing effect. "My grandmother taught me these medicines," Maya explained, pressing fresh leaves against his side. "She said healing comes from earth and sky together." She began to sing softly in her native tongue, a melody that seemed to float with the curling smoke toward the ceiling. "What are the words?" Boone asked, his voice rough from disuse. "A prayer for strength," she answered, "for the body to remember its wholeness." Her fingers worked gently, avoiding the tender spots. "Will you learn it?" Boone nodded, and she taught him the sounds, phrase by phrase. His clumsy pronunciation made her smile, but she corrected him patiently until he could follow along. The familiar rhythm of learning something new eased some of his restlessness. "Much obliged," he whispered when they finished. "Been a long time since I said any prayers worth hearing." Maya settled beside the fire, adding small sticks to the flames. "Why did you stop?" Boone stared at the ceiling beams, memories rising like smoke. "Lost my wife, Sarah, 15 years back. Fever took her in 3 days." He swallowed hard. "Couldn't see God's purpose in it. So I ran to the mountains, trapped fur, lived wild. Figured if I kept moving, grief couldn't catch me." Outside, wind rattled the cabin's walls. Ash nickered softly from his corner, and Maya rose to check on him. The horse's recovery continued. Steadily, his coat regaining shine, his eyes bright with life. When she returned, she sat closer to Boone's bedroll. "My brother believes strength shows in how we protect others," she said, her voice carrying the weight of memory. "Not in how hard we can strike." "Reckon he was right about that," Boone admitted. "Though sometimes standing up means taking hits." Ash approached carefully, stretching his neck to nuzzle Boone's shoulder. The gentle touch reminded him of those first desperate nights, fighting to keep the horse alive. Something had awakened in him then, a purpose he'd thought long buried. A knock at the door startled them both. Maya's hand went to the knife at her belt, but the visitor proved to be Samuel Tucker, a farmer from the valley. Snow dusted his shoulders as he stepped inside, removing his hat respectfully. "Thought you ought to know," Tucker said, warming his hands by the fire. "Toland's men are in town, showing papers at the saloon, claiming they've got legal right to that spring near the U-Camp." He glanced apologetically at Maya. "Most folks are too scared to speak against them." Boone's ribs ached as he pushed himself straighter. "Those papers burned with the barn." "They've got more," Tucker said grimly. "Whether real or forged, don't matter much when they've got guns to back them." After Tucker left, silence filled the cabin like the falling snow outside. Boone felt the familiar urge to pack his few belongings, to disappear into the wilderness where other people's troubles couldn't touch him. It would be easier than facing Toland's gang again. Maya seemed to read his thoughts. She moved to sit beside him, her presence steady as mountain stone. "The spring feeds our gardens, waters our children," she said quietly. "Without it, my people cannot survive here." She placed her hand over his, her skin warm against his weathered knuckles. "You found life in a dying horse. Will you leave us to die too?" Her words struck deep, piercing the armor of self-preservation he built over lonely years. Boone looked at their joined hands, his pale and lined, hers brown and strong. He thought of Sarah, of how she'd always stood for what was right, no matter the cost. "No," he said finally, his voice growing stronger. "No, I won't run this time." Maya squeezed his hand once before releasing it. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside Boone felt a fire kindling, not of anger or vengeance, but of resolve. The time for silence was past. Whatever came next, he would face it standing beside Maya, fighting for justice in the only way that mattered. Together, the morning after the resolve hardened, Boone and Maya made their way to the church, where Reverend Alcott welcomed them despite the charred ruins of his barn. His face was drawn with exhaustion, but determination burned in his eyes as he led them inside the small chapel. "The Lord provides," he said, retrieving ink and paper from his study. "We may have lost the original documents, but your testimonies still carry weight." Maya sat at the rough-hewn table, candlelight flickering across her face as she carefully described the horse's distinctive brand, a circle crossed by 3 lines, marking it as her family's. Her voice grew tight as she recalled the night the drifters had raided their herd, stealing Ash and 2 other horses. "My brother," she paused, steadying herself. "He tried to stop them. They struck him down, left him bleeding in the dust. The horses were all we had." Boone's hand tightened on his chair as he listened. When his turn came, he detailed finding the forged deeds in the cabin's chest, describing the clumsy signatures and incorrect survey marks that proved their falsehood. The scratch of the pen seemed loud in the quiet church as Reverend Alcott recorded everything. "Truth is like water," the preacher said as he finished. "It finds its way through any crack." He sealed the papers carefully with wax. "Dry Fork is 2 days hard riding south. God be with you both." Outside, Ash stood patiently in the snow, his coat thickened against winter's bite. Boone marveled at the change in him, ribs no longer visible, eyes bright and alert. The horse accepted the packs without complaint, strength restored through weeks of care. Back at the cabin, Boone sat cross-legged on his bedroll, drawing the whetstone along his knife's edge with practiced strokes. The familiar rhythm steadied his thoughts as he checked and cleaned his old rifle next, working oil into the mechanism. "Lord," he spoke suddenly, voice rough with disuse, "ain't been much for talking to you these years past." Maya paused in her packing, listening quietly. "But if you're minded to help, we sure could use some guidance." The words felt strange on his tongue, yet right somehow. "Help us see justice done. Amen." They set out at first light, the sun a pale disk behind snow clouds. Their breath frosted in the air as they followed the winding creek southward. Boone led Ash, while Maya rode her sturdy pony, both animals stepping carefully through deep drifts. The testimony papers rode secure in Boone's saddlebags, wrapped in oiled cloth against the wet. Every few hours, Boone called a halt, insisting both horses needed rest. He watched Ash closely for any sign of weakness, but the horse moved with growing confidence, head held high against the wind. Maya's pony was sure-footed but small, and she dismounted often to walk beside it, easing its burden. "Creek's getting wider," Boone noted as afternoon shadows lengthened. "Better find shelter before dark." They made camp beneath a stand of towering pines, their branches heavy with snow. While Maya gathered firewood, Boone cleared a space for their bedrolls and arranged pine boughs for the horses' shelter. Soon a small fire crackled. Pushing back the gathering cold, Maya produced dried meat and cornbread from her bags, sharing it between them. They ate in comfortable silence, watching sparks spiral up toward the darkening sky. Ash and the pony stood close together, sharing warmth, their occasional soft nickering the only sound besides the fire's pop and hiss. Boone felt an unfamiliar peace settle over him. The weight of his solitary years seemed lighter somehow, shared with this young woman who had taught him to pray again, who fought with quiet strength for her people's survival. He thought of Sarah, wondering if perhaps God had not abandoned him after all, but had been leading him step by step toward this moment of purpose. "Sleep," Maya said softly, noting his tired eyes. "I will take first watch." Boone nodded gratefully, wrapping himself in his blanket. The fire's warmth and the horse's steady breathing followed him down into dreams, where he walked familiar mountain trails without the burden of grief that had driven him there so long ago. The journey south proved brutal. Heavy snow drove against them in stinging sheets, while bitter winds found every gap in their winter clothing. Boone pulled his scarf tighter, watching Maya hunch low over her pony's neck against the relentless cold. Ash plodded steadily beside them, steam rising from his flanks. "Tell me about your brother," Boone said during one of their brief rests, hoping conversation might distract from their misery. They huddled beneath a rocky overhang, sharing strips of dried venison. Maya's eyes softened at the memory. Daniel loved horses more than anything. He could gentle the wildest colt with just his voice and patience. She pulled her blanket closer. "He taught me everything, how to read tracks, predict weather, speak to the spirits of the land." Boone nodded, understanding the depth of her loss. "My Sarah," he offered in return. "She could make flowers grow in the poorest soil. Said every living thing just needed someone to believe in it." He hadn't spoken of her in years, but here, with Maya, the words came easier. They pressed on through the afternoon, taking turns breaking trail through deep drifts. The cold seeped into their bones despite layers of wool and fur. By nightfall, they could barely feel their feet. They made camp in a hollow, building their fire large against the darkness. Dawn of the second day brought no relief. Ice crusted their eyelashes and froze their breath into tiny crystals. They walked more than rode, trying to keep warm through movement. Maya taught Boone Ute words for snow and wind, while he shared old trail songs his father had sung. Finally, as dusk settled over the valley, lights appeared through the swirling snow-dry forks as streets glowed with oil lamps and hearth fires. Boone felt Maya tense beside him as they approached the Indian Agency building. Two soldiers paced before the door, rifles cradled in their arms. "Papers to see the agent," one demanded gruffly. Maya produced a worn document from inside her coat. The soldier squinted at it, then jerked his head toward the door. "Make it quick. Office closes at sundown." Inside, warmth from a pot-bellied stove hit them like a physical wave. The Indian agent, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles, looked up from his desk with obvious impatience. "Yes?" Boone stepped forward, aware of the snow melting from his boots onto the wooden floor. "Sir, we've come about water rights on Thunder Ridge. There's been theft and fraud. Documentation?" The agent cut in, holding out his hand. Maya laid out their carefully written testimonies. The agent's lips thinned as he read, his skepticism evident in every line of his face. "These are merely personal accounts. Where are the original deeds you claim to have found?" "Burned, sir," Boone explained. "The men who forged them." The door burst open, bringing a blast of cold air and four familiar figures. Jed Tolan and his gang swaggered in, snow falling from their coats. Tolan's smile was sharp as a knife. "Evening, Agent Phillips," he drawled. "Heard these two might be causing trouble." He cast a dismissive glance at Maya, spinning tailies about stolen horses and springs. "We have proof," Maya said firmly, though Boone saw her hands trembling. The brand on that horse. Brands can be faked, one of Talon's men sneered. Everyone knows Indians steal horses anyway. That's a lie. Boone's voice rose sharply. I found their forged papers. They're trying to steal water that rightfully belongs to the Ute people. The agent adjusted his spectacles nervously. Without the original documents, and with the barn fire destroying other evidence, he shuffled papers on his desk. It becomes a matter of one word against another. Then, believe mine. Boone stepped closer, planting both hands on the desk. I'm a God-fearing man who's never told a lie. I bought that cabin fair, found their false claims inside it. These men are thieves and frauds. For a moment, the agent seemed to waver, studying Boone's weathered face. But Tolan moved closer, his men spreading out behind him. Careful, Agent Phillips, he said softly. Wouldn't want any unfortunate accidents, like that barn fire. His hand rested casually near his gun. The room grew thick with tension. Maya stood straight and proud despite her exhaustion, while Boone's muscles coiled for action. The soldiers by the door shifted uneasily, watching the scene unfold. The agent's gaze darted between them all Boone's earnest face, Maya's quiet dignity, Talon's threatening smile. Papers trembled in his hands as he weighed justice against fear. The tense silence in the agent's office shattered as boots thundered on the wooden porch outside. The door swung wide, letting in a blast of cold air and a crowd of familiar faces from Grey Rock. Reverend Alcott stood at their head, his arm wrapped in white bandages, his eyes bright with purpose. Agent Phillips, the Reverend called out, removing his snow-dusted hat. We've ridden hard through the storm to speak truth before your desk. Talon's hand tightened on his gun belt. This ain't your business, preacher. Oh, but it is. Alcott stepped forward, followed by Thomas Wheeler, one of the valley's oldest farmers. When men threaten God's children and steal their water, it becomes everyone's business. The agent straightened in his chair, glasses catching the lamplight. You have testimony to offer? We do. Wheeler's weathered face was grim. I saw those forged deeds before the fire took them. Clear as day. They were written in Tolan's hand, same as the threats he left on my fence post last spring. More townspeople crowded into the office, their presence giving strength to the truth. Sarah Miller, who ran the general store, spoke of watching Tolan's men harass Maya's family at the trading post. The blacksmith described their intimidation of farmers near the spring. And Boone McAllister, Reverend Alcott's voice carried above the others. I've known honest men all my years of preaching, and he stands among the best. When he found those papers, he came straight to me, seeking justice rather than profit. Maya moved forward then, her steps quiet but sure. She placed one hand on Ash's scarred flank, the horse standing steady beside her. This horse belonged to my brother Daniel, she said, her voice catching but never breaking. He raised it from a colt, taught it to trust, to serve our people. Our fingers traced the brand mark. These men took more than a horse when they raided our camp. They took my brother's life work, left it to die in that shed. The room fell silent. Even the soldiers by the door stood straighter, moved by the quiet power of her words. Boone stepped to Maya's side, his voice rough with emotion. I bought that cabin for $10, thinking I'd found just a place to hide from the world. Instead, I found this horse, barely alive, and with it a chance to do right. He met the agent's eyes directly. I've wandered these mountains 20 years, running from purpose. But God put that cabin, that horse, and these good people in my path. I aim to stand with them. Agent Phillips removed his glasses, rubbing tired eyes. He looked at the testimonies spread across his desk, at the faces filling his office townspeople. And you'd alike, united in their cause. His gaze settled on Tolan, who stood coiled like a rattler about to strike. The evidence seems clear, Phillips said slowly. Multiple witnesses, consistent testimony. You're making a mistake, Tolan snarled. We've got friends in high places, and I have a duty to uphold the law. The agent's voice strengthened. These deeds are hereby declared void. The spring on Thunder Ridge is restored to its rightful owners, the Ute people, as per the original treaty. Tolan's hand jerked toward his gun, but the soldiers moved faster. Their rifles snapped up, unwavering. I suggest you leave, Phillips continued, before I have you arrested for fraud, theft, and attempted intimidation of a federal officer. For a moment, the gang leader's face twisted with rage. Then he spat on the floor and backed toward the door, his men following. This ain't over, he growled. Yes, Reverend Alcott said quietly. It is. The soldiers escorted Tolan's gang outside, their boots fading into the snowy night. Maya's shoulders trembled as she pressed her face against Ash's neck, tears finally flowing freely. Boone felt his own eyes grow damp as townspeople surrounded them with congratulations and support. Agent Phillips gathered the testimonies carefully, securing them in his desk. I'll have official papers drawn up by morning, he said. The spring will be protected under federal law from now on. Reverend Alcott clasped Boone's shoulder. The Lord works in mysterious ways, friend. Sometimes it takes a dying horse to heal a man's heart. Boone nodded, watching Maya stroke Ash's gray coat. The horse that had brought them together now stood, proud and strong, a living testament to the power of faith, trust, and justice. Morning sunlight painted Gray Rock's muddy street with golden stripes. Townspeople gathered along the boardwalks, their breath frosting in the crisp air. Children pressed against fence posts, pointing and whispering as Maya led Ash down the center of town. The horse's coat gleamed silver gray, muscles rippling beneath. His restored frame a far cry from the skeletal creature Boone had found trapped in the lean-to. Look how strong he is now, a little girl called out, waving her mittened hands. Even the most skeptical settlers, those who had kept their distance during the conflict, nodded with respect as Maya and Boone passed. Ash pranced lightly, head held high, his hooves clicking against packed earth. The transformation seemed almost miraculous, both in the horse and in the town itself. Near the general store, Maya pulled Ash to a stop. She turned to Boone, her dark eyes bright with emotion. My people will remember what you did, she said softly. You stood with us when others would not. Boone adjusted his hat, uncomfortable with praise. Reckon I only found the courage because you believed I could. He patted Ash's neck. Sometimes the Lord sends angels with 4 legs to teach us about standing tall. Together they rode out of town, following the winding trail back toward Boone's cabin. The winter air felt crisp and clean, like the world had been washed new. Boone breathed deeply, aware of a lightness in his chest he hadn't known since before. Sarah died. The mountains seemed to welcome them home, snow-capped peaks gleaming against blue sky dot as evening painted the clouds purple and gold. Voices drifted up the trail. Maya's family appeared through the pines, her mother, aunts, and cousins, carrying baskets of food and bundles of blankets. They filled Boone's yard with greetings and laughter. Inside the cabin, the rough-hewn table groaned under dishes of corn cakes, dried berries, and venison stew. The once empty hearth blazed warm and bright. Children played in the corners, while elders shared stories, their voices weaving English and Ute into a single thread of community. Boone sat back in his chair, wonder filling his heart. Just weeks ago, he'd been a drifter with $10 to his name, buying a moldering shack just to have somewhere to hide. Now that same cabin rang with life and fellowship. Through the window, he could see Ash standing contentedly in the repaired lean-to, steam rising from his back in the cooling air. Thank you, Lord, Boone whispered, watching Maya teach his biscuit recipe to her young cousin, for showing me that a man's true wealth isn't measured in coins, but in the family you weave. from strangers. The cabin glowed like a lantern in the gathering dusk, its light a beacon of hope and healing for all who passed by. The mountain snow surrendered to spring's gentle touch, revealing tender shoots of green beneath. Boone and Maya worked side by side in the warming days, their hands joining in shared purpose. They mended split-rail fences, the rhythm of their hammers echoing through awakening pines. In the fresh-turned earth behind the cabin, they planted rows of beans, Maya teaching Boone the old ways of her people's planting songs. The cabin, once a hollow shelter for one weary soul, now bridged two worlds. Smoke curled from its chimney, morning and evening, carrying the scent of fresh bread and brewing coffee. Ash grazed in the meadow below, his coat gleaming in the sun. The brand scar on his flank had faded to silver, a testament to healing's power dot as golden light painted the western sky. One evening, Boone knelt by his hearth, his weathered hands clasped in prayer, voice strong and clear. Lord, I thank you for this horse that brought me back to life, for this girl who showed me courage, for this second chance I never dreamed I'd see. Maya's hand came to rest on his shoulder, warm and steady. She smiled down at him, her eyes reflecting the lamplight that glowed through the cabin windows. Outside, Boone caught Ash's silhouette against the dimming sky. We were both half dead when we came here, he whispered to the horse. Now look, what the Lord's made of us. If this story made you pause, reflect, or even smile, don't forget to subscribe. I post daily, and the next story might be exactly what you need to hear.